Despite Australia's efforts to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, there's one area that continues to be problematic. The second biggest contributor to our emissions is industry, the greenhouse gases that come mainly from manufacturing and extracting and processing resources. They make up about 30% of our emissions, and they're rising.
That reflects increasing economic activity, which on the one hand is positive, but on the other hand, the rate of improvement of energy use and carbon intensity in our industrial sector, broadly defined, is at the bottom end of the world standards. We have fallen a long way behind.
One of the main drivers of industry emissions is our exports of liquid natural gas. This is Gladstone in Queensland, where 3 LNG plants have come online in the last 5 years. Australia's now the world's biggest exporter of LNG.
So this is our firewater facilities, and we've got 2 firewater tanks at the, I guess it's the north end of the plant.
This plant is operated by Australian company Santos. Kevin Gallagher is its CEO.
So those are our LNG storage tanks, and you can see how...
The gas is pumped from fields 420 kilometres away. Here it's liquefied, ready for export.
Well, once it goes onto our ships here, the gas goes off to our Asian buyers, our Asian customers, and that's in Korea and Malaysia. The LNG sector is growing its emissions during this period because we're ramping up the industry as all of those big LNG projects come online. The demand in Asia is driving that growth in LNG because of their desire to replace coal in the future energy mix with gas.
When burned to create energy, gas is cleaner than coal, which is good for the countries that buy it. But extracting and liquefying it here in Australia is pushing up our emissions.
The proportion of Australia's emissions coming from the sector have grown quite a lot and will continue to do so for the next 5 or 10 years as more plant come online and the existing plant reach maximum production.
The holy grail for reducing emissions in the fossil fuel industry is carbon capture and storage. CCS, as it's known, involves capturing carbon emissions and pumping them into underground storage. The industry's been talking about it for decades, but in Australia it's still not a reality. Why is it taking so long to get carbon capture and storage working in Australia?
Well, look, because it's expensive, because the technology is unproven, and it's been bitty, I think, in terms of the commitments and the efforts to do it in the past.
Santos first set up a CCS project over a decade ago, but stopped it after 2 years because it was too expensive. Amid mounting pressure from investor groups to act on climate change, the company's starting a new trial this year. It has been 10 years that we've been talking about carbon capture and storage as the solution to reducing emissions in this sector. It's still not working. What's the backup plan if it doesn't?
Well, look, I'm confident it will. When you look at the commitment of...
Is it a guarantee?
Oh, look, you can never guarantee anything, but the fact that we're spending this money...
But what if it doesn't?
Well, I think the fact that we're spending the money we're spending, we wouldn't be investing that if we didn't believe it would work.
I've grown to become more and more sceptical about CCS as a solution, even for these industrial sectors.
While the fossil fuel industry here struggles to make CCS work, there's another problem. Right now, the government essentially lets big polluters nominate their own carbon emissions limits. The policy that's supposed to keep emissions from big polluters in check is called the safeguard mechanism. The government sets big polluters a baseline, a maximum amount of emissions they can produce before they're penalised. The problem is, while Australia's trying to reduce its emissions, for many companies, the baselines keep rising.
If companies are not happy with that baseline, they've got flexibility to apply to increase that baseline even further. Just under a third of all facilities have increased their baselines beyond where they began initially. So there's even more headroom for companies to increase their emissions.
Emissions from these polluters have gone up by 12% since 2015, according to industry analysts. Last month, the government changed the rules, making it even easier for companies to nominate higher emissions limits.
What incentives do facilities covered by the safeguards mechanism have to reduce their emissions under the system?
In simple terms, none. And that's one of the issues with the scheme. The real way to get industry to reduce emissions is through a penalty, through a stick. At the moment, that stick is the emissions baseline, and that limit is too high.
Many in industry are working on the assumption that a future government will introduce a carbon trading scheme, making them pay for their emissions.
You've been operating with a shadow carbon price. You're operating on the basis that your baselines will be going down. Yeah. Would it be easier for you if there was some sort of carbon trading scheme here in Australia?
Yeah, look, I mean, I expect in time we will see a carbon trading scheme. And that's why we're working hard to reduce our emissions.
Carbon policy uncertainty has been the single biggest obstacle to us being properly on the road to a low emissions economy. Industry is crying out for policy predictability.